Hey guys, so back again. We're at the point now you should have yesterday. Remember, we had you sketch your Mono Lake. You tried to rather sketch your Mono Lake food webs. Might have been a little tricky, but you remember you looked at the organism cards and just tried to draw the relationships. So it asks you to go back through them, and it might have gotten a little bit messy, but you should start to see, if you go back and look at your drawing, what some of the feeding roles were. Like, what we mean by that is who ate what. But what we're going to see today really quickly is that number one, your food web was probably kind of messy, and that's okay. A lot of arrows going everywhere. But also, number two, not every organism played the same role. Some organisms didn't get eaten by anybody. Some organisms got eaten by a lot. Some organisms ate a lot. And some organisms didn't eat anything, or actually didn't eat other organisms. So we're going to go back, and yesterday was practice, but I want to show you a couple of tricks on how to organize, make your food webs a little more accurate and detailed. And I want to save you the trouble, too, of having to try to draw them again. We're going to look at some software you can use today to create your own. So right now, you should be looking back at your own. I want you to have your food webs out and take a look at your drawings you attempted. And if you look, you're going to notice there probably should have been a couple, at least one, maybe two organisms that they didn't eat anything. They didn't have any arrows pointing to them. So think about that. What would they have to? How could they survive without eating? And as I'm sure you're well aware, a lot of the organisms make their own food, and we call them collectively. If you're an organism that makes your own food, like certain kinds of plants, through photosynthesis, we're going to look at them in detail later on. We call those guys producers because they make their own food. So it's just a catchphrase to refer to them. But what about organisms like your brine shrimp? If you look at your brine shrimp or your gulls, they don't do photosynthesis, obviously. So they don't make their own food. They're not producers. So what would we call them? How do they get their own food? And you can see up here at the top, we'd call them consumers. Now, any consumer in your food web that you had, if it's an animal that eats just producers, if it eats just the photosynthesizers, we call them primary consumers, or also first level consumers, because they're like the first in line. If we think of our chain, one thing eats another thing, eats another thing, eats another thing. They're the first group of organisms, the first ones that are doing the eating. They eat the organisms that make their own food. So look back at your food web. You should be able to kind of identify who in there is a primary consumer. And the nice thing is we can keep going. You should have in your food webs consumers that eat other consumers. So anybody that eats the primary consumers, we would call their next in line, their secondary or second level consumers. So it's just another way to organize your food web and make it a little bit easier to understand. We'd have if we go back again, remember our producers, organisms that make their own food, and then we have our primary consumers, then our secondary consumers, and I think you know where we're going with this. Anybody that's higher up that eats secondary consumers, we'd call them third level consumers, or tertiary, kind of a nerdy word that just means third. And you can keep going. You could have fourth level consumers and so on. Eventually, though, we're going to see in a few weeks, you can only go so far in a food web before you can't have any more consumers. And we'll figure out why. But for now, you should be able to go back and kind of reorganize your food webs. And there's a couple of other little oddballs too, is that some organisms never get hunted, they just die. So think about what happens. You probably, if you look at your food web, you should have at least one organism that doesn't get eaten by anybody, but it does die eventually. So what happens to it? If you think about it, there are other organisms like earthworms and vultures and these gross critters that can come along and they eat the dead organic matter. So something doesn't get eaten by another organism directly. Once it dies and starts to be eaten when it's dead, we call that detritus. So there are some organisms like earthworms, vultures that eat, just basically we call them detritivores. They eat dead stuff, kind of gross. And there's even one more category somewhere in your food web that dead organisms, not all their bodies entirely get eaten by others. Some of them, they start to rot and they decompose and they break down and they get put back into the earth. They actually get consumed by microorganisms like bacteria and fungus. And we call those guys, bacteria and fungus, we call them decomposers because they actually decompose, they break down the dead rotting stuff. And it's interesting to know every single thing in your food web eventually dies, and eventually parts of it get decomposed somewhere along the line. Even plants, if they don't get eaten, eventually they'll die and they'll rot and they'll get decomposed. So what I'm going to ask you to do is to go back to your food web and look at the roles and try to put, a nice way to do that is you can organize them. I'm not going to have you draw them. I'm going to have you do it electronically, but it helps make your food webs a little bit more organized to have producers at the bottom, then your primary consumers in the next level, secondary consumers, and so on. So it's just another way, like think about if you were to have a levels like this and you wrote your organisms where they belonged, it's kind of a nice way to organize and separate your food webs. And notice you even have decomposers over here on the side as well. So if you were to do that, you should be able to, and I'm not going to make you redraw it, but think about if you were to redo your food web and show the levels of organisms. Still have your arrows on there to show who eats what, but it's a nice way to organize that. So what I'm going to have you do, and I'm going to show you really quickly here, is I'm going to have you go on to FOSSWeb and use their software. And there's a link on our Google Classroom. I just want to show you real quickly how you can manipulate those organisms and change it in case you make mistakes so that you can create a digital version, a better version of your food web. So I'm going to take you to a screen. It's going to look kind of like this, pretty simple. It's got your organisms up here in a way that we can organize them. So here's actually what you're going to be seeing when you click on the link on Classroom. You just go down and click Start, and that's going to give you access to, you can see all of your critters you'll recognize up here, and you've got space to drag them down here. Notice the boxes: producers, consumers, decomposers. So there's some buttons here. You can move the organisms. So like, for example, who in here might be best to start with is a consumer. Who eats other animals? Now, obviously, this guy does. So you can drag him down there. It'll let you. Your gull, your California gull, we know he ate something in there. Who in here were your producers? Who in here? Well, wait a minute. You had to have some things in there that didn't have any arrows going to it, right? So if you're not sure, I don't know what these are, you actually can go and click on Info and click on the cards. Like, what the heck is this thing? If you click on it, the card will come over a really abbreviated one in the back: planktonic algae. And they show you their prey, none. They don't eat anything, but they get eaten by a couple of other things. So the fact that they have no prey, they don't eat anything, tells you they've got to be a producer. So you can go back and click Move and drag them down to the producer spot down in the bottom there. So you can keep doing that with all the critters once you have them sorted. Remember, you can check Info. And here's the nice thing. You can actually connect, go back and draw in your arrows. Like, what's the relationship between your coyote and this gull? Now, even if you don't remember, you can go back to Info, click on the coyote. Let's see, does it eat? Yep. Well, some of its prey, it eats California gull. So I can then go back and I can move these guys so that, and you can click on this connect button and you can connect them so that you can have the ability to, you can draw arrows. Now, if I were to go back, let's say, I'm going to get rid of that again, to click on it, let's say I accidentally draw the arrow the wrong way. I clicked on coyote and I have it going that way. Remember, that's not the right way to do it. Oops, I made a mistake. You can hover over it, you can go back and you can click that out. I know the arrow is supposed to go this way to show that the gull gets eaten by the coyote. And the nice thing is that once you connect these arrows, you can still, under the Move button, you can go back and rearrange them and space them out. You can put them in different spots. Like, I want to go ahead and put this guy up a little bit higher because I think he was a higher consumer. I'm going to have this guy here, and then this guy ate some other organisms. Let's go back and see what he eats. So remember, you can keep clicking the cards. Oh, wait, that's right. He eats, let's see, brine fly. So I can go back up here. I can click on brine fly, and I can put that down here, and I can connect a link to it that way. So you can start to get a really completed food web. Remember, you can move them around to make it easier, to give yourself more space. And here's the best part, is that when you think you're done and you have them all there, you can actually go and click check links. And it'll tell you up here, anything that's green, you have correctly classified. Anything that is a bad link that's backwards will be in red. If you're missing links, like right here, this is showing like, oops, I'm missing some links here. Like this guy's not eating something, this guy should be eating other things. Something's missing there. So it's a way to double check. You can go back and you can add things down here. Like, oops, I need to also have this down here. I need to have this down here. And remember, you're trying to complete your food web. And the best part is, if we go back to our thing, is that once you think you have your food web completed, I'm going to ask you just to take a screenshot of that. And to do that, all you do is go up to your keyboard and you're going to press the control button, and you're going to look for, if you're using a Chromebook, or actually a lot of different computers, but especially most of you using Chromebooks, you're going to look for this button right here. This button that's up at the top, that right above the number 6. If you do that, it's going to take a screenshot of you're going to copy what's on your screen, and then I'm going to ask you to go and paste it into a Google Doc that's underneath our exit ticket, and there's a Google form. So what you're going to be turning in at the end to show that you've done this properly and you get it is a picture of your food web right in a Google Doc, and then you're going to answer, a couple of questions, multiple choice questions about your food web. So I can check. I'm going to look at your food webs to see if you did them correctly, and I'm going to look at your scores on the Google form. So multiple guess questions. All right. So I want to give you guys the opportunity to go ahead and try this, and good luck. I'll be in the Google Meet to help you out.